It's probably the hottest September on record in Britain at the moment, so I feel like it makes sense that I'm talking about one of the only series by Rick Riordan that is partially set in the UK. So, yes, like I mentioned in last week's episode of Magnus Chase, today I'm talking about the Kane Chronicles and the fact that the Kane Chronicles is severely underrated. Yes, that is a big statement. But just like I was talking about with Magnus Chase last week, Magnus Chase was appreciated for its connections to Annabeth and Percy, and then later its own individual aspects. Whereas Kane Chronicles never really got any of that appreciation because it has no connection to Percy and Annabeth, except for the Demigods and Magicians story, which, as I found out through, admittedly, my own experiences with people, there are people who've read Demigods and Magicians and have no idea about anything to do with Carter and Sadie because they didn't read Kane Chronicles. They just wanted to read Demigods and Magicians because of Percy and Annabeth's involvement. And that just says a lot about Kane Chronicles in general. It is completely separated from the Percy world, which seems to be a reason why a lot of people do not read this series. There are many people who do not know about the books, have not read the books, are not interested in reading the books, or anything related to them. You can look on multiple Royalverse related subreddits, Facebook groups, Instagrams, etc., and you will rarely find the same amount of number of content related to the Kane Chronicles as you do for Percy Jackson. And I feel that is similar to the Magnus Chase of it all, that the Kane Chronicles is its own thing, which is why it did not gain the attention from the fandom, because it does not have the Percy connection. Which is just unfortunate because the Kane Chronicles is an incredible series, and interestingly enough, utilized a lot of similar aspects for Heroes of Olympus, for example, and kind of did some things better. Yes, it still had similar plot related issues as I've mentioned for many parts of the series in general, from Percy Jackson and the Olympians all the way to Trials of Apollo, in that it does meander a little bit sometimes. But it still has an incredibly strong story, and there are aspects about it that it's just disappointing that so many people are missing out on this series just because it's not connected to Percy in some way. Not to assume that's why a lot of people aren't reading it, but that's kind of how it sometimes feels. But to talk about the positives of Kane Chronicles and why it's disappointing that it is underrated in this way, Carter and Sadie are probably some of the most interesting characters to me because they are so different from each other and work so well together. The Kanes give to me what a lot of people say about Heroes of Olympus. Everyone's like, oh yeah, the Heroes of Olympus characters, they're so interesting, they work well together, you know, there's this dynamic between them, their relationships are so interesting. It's not true, but the Kanes have that. And the interesting part about it is we see their relationship develop. Carter and Sadie, even though they are siblings, start off as complete strangers. They see each other maybe 2 times a year. Well, no, that is how many times they see it, not even a maybe. They see each other 2 times a year. That's it. And that's been that way since Carter was 6 and he's now 14. There's nearly 10 years of this. And we see how they develop through the tragedy of losing their father, through the tragedy of finding out about what happened to their mother, through all the tragedies that happen around them and all the horrible things that happen to them, and like them being possessed, them fighting for their lives, them trying to save the world without knowing what's going on and having to deal with so many things without even much of a guiding presence. Unlike Percy, who has like Annabeth and Grover and all these sort of things, the Kanes are going through it by themselves. They occasionally have Amos to help them, but Amos isn't even there all the time. A lot of it is also them relying on each other. And their characters are themselves so interesting. Sadie does kind of fit into that Percy Leo brand of the sarcastic, sassy character, but she also has her own brand of, uniqueness in that not only is she an irritating preteen who we see grow a little bit throughout the series. Obviously, she's still a preteen to a degree, or an early teen. But we see how much she changed, how much she grows as a person, how much she comes to rely and love her brother after kind of not really giving a damn about him to begin with, and see how much more powerful she becomes as well as someone who doesn't really know what she's doing and kind of relied a lot on the possession aspect with the gods to figuring out her own power by the end. It was a really interesting thing to see. And then you've got Carter, who so many people completely underestimate Carter when they do read the series, because he comes across as that Jason boring character element. Whereas Carter is different than that, because not only does he have a reason for being this way, because this is a kid who's been isolated the majority of his life, traveling the world and running around the world, running in fear from the world with his father since he was a child, and has never had the chance to bond and meet with people his own age, and never really gets to have that chance because he then goes on to be a teacher throughout the rest of the series of teaching other magicians. He's basically like an adult in a kid's body. He's gone through so much, but we see him grow. We see him become more relaxed. We see him become a teenager by the end of the series, which I think is probably the most beautiful arcs out there, as someone who's so serious and someone who's so afraid and someone who doesn't think he's a fighter, who's someone who doesn't think he's skilled or talented and doesn't think he's normal or anything like that, end up being a leader, powerful, and getting to be a teenage boy with someone that he cares about. The characters in this series, even the side characters, like Walt's backstory, oh my god. But there's just so much about this series that, considering it's only 3 books, quite big books to some degree, but like not in comparison to like Heroes of Olympus or anything like that. It's 3 books with world-ending stakes, and it still feels contained enough. We still have that ability, just like we did in the original series, to see these characters develop, and somewhat even more so to a degree. I wouldn't, not to put down Percy's arc, but I feel like, especially in terms of Carter's arc, I think, is probably one of the most interesting arcs. But people just portray him as a boring character. But he's so much more than that. Even the world of the gods is something that I think is not as appreciated as it could be, because the Egyptian gods are so much more different than the gods we meet in the other series. Because yes, whilst they have the wacky aspect that we've got in Percy Jackson and them kind of being almost human-like in that they are kind of they have all the emotions. They're selfish, they're assholes, they're very egotistical, all these sort of things. And we have that with the Egyptian gods, but also I always felt that the Egyptian gods in the Kane Chronicles felt so much more like gods to a degree, because you would be afraid of them. Like, Set is a very, like, he has a sarcastic nature, but he is scary. Set is a god who is so menacing and chaotic that you just don't know what's going to happen with him. Even Apophis, the literal big bad snake, is frightening. And all the gods that when we meet, Isis, Horus, Osiris, just all of these big name gods, they feel like you feel the energy of them as gods. Again, they have goofy elements because, again, this is a kid's series, but they still feel powerful to a degree. Kind of like what we did get in the early Percy Jackson things, of like when Mr. D would show the power in his eyes to Percy when Percy was kind of making fun of him a little bit. It's like that, but like tenfold with the Kane Chronicles. And it's not to say that the gods needed to be shown as powerful in the other series. It had a uniqueness in Kane Chronicles that I just really appreciated. And just as a whole, the Kane Chronicles explored character relationships in a way that was new and interesting because of the sibling dynamic. They tried to do it to a degree with Heroes of Olympus with Jason and Talia, but then kind of gave up on it. And then we have a similar aspect-ish of Apollo and Meg, but they're obviously not actually siblings. It was new, it was innovative for the way in which Rick had been writing. Yes, there are problems plot-wise, but there are problems with so much plot-wise in Heroes of Olympus, and yet it is a very beloved series. The Kane Chronicles, it has its issues, but the sibling dynamic, Carter and Sadie's growth, the portrayal of the gods, and even just the storyline itself of these kids having to save the world from being eaten, is just such an interesting and fascinating concept that it just feels so disappointing that, unlike Heroes of Olympus, that was being written at the same time, and unlike all the other series that came before and after, it's the one that most people either don't know about, haven't read, or have no interest in reading. And it's just a shame because there's so much there. And I feel like the Kane Chronicles should be as appreciated as the other series. And that just hasn't happened yet. Well, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me that the Kane Chronicles is underrated in some way? Did you read them yourselves? Has this made you want to read them? Or if you have read them, what did you actually think of them? Let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe, check out my Patreon for early access to all of these videos, check out my books, because if you're going to read the Kane Chronicles, you should also read my books as well, because I am poor. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you all